The air on the grinder tasted of salt, sweat, and failure. It was a coarse, metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat, a constant reminder of the physical and spiritual cost of admission to this brotherhood of warriors. Alara knew the taste well. She knew the grit of the sand that blew in from the Coronado coast, the sting of the antiseptic used to scrub the blood from the training mats, the low hum of anxiety that vibrated through the very concrete beneath her feet. For 30 years, she had been a part of this world in a way these young, screaming candidates could never comprehend. Now, she simply mopped its floors, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit, her presence as unnoticed as the tide itself. Her movements were a study in economy, each sweep of the mop a precise, disciplined arc. No wasted energy, no superfluous motion. It was a rhythm born of a lifetime of purpose. A young cadet, his chest puffed out with the temporary invincibility of youth, swaggered across her freshly cleaned section of the floor, leaving a deliberate trail of muddy boot prints. "Watch it, Grandma," he sneered, not even breaking stride. His name was Miller, and he carried his arrogance like a second skin. Alara stopped. She didn't look at the prints. She looked at him. Her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, held his for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in them, no indignation. There was only a profound stillness, an ancient calm that seemed to absorb his petty aggression and render it meaningless. He faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before his pride reasserted itself. He scoffed and turned away, joining his cohort of smirking acolytes. Alara said nothing. She simply dipped her mop back into the bucket of murky water, the worn wooden handle familiar in her gnarled hands, and began to erase his mark. The squeak of the mop on the linoleum was the only sound she made, a quiet, persistent act of restoration in a place dedicated to the art of destruction. The disrespect became a quiet ritual, a daily test of her immense patience. Miller, emboldened by her silence, which he mistook for frailty, escalated his campaign of petty humiliations. A protein shaker accidentally knocked over, its sticky, sweet contents pooling across her clean floor. A pile of heavy training gear left directly in her path, forcing her to laboriously move each piece. He and his friends would watch from a distance, their whispers and laughter a low, buzzing annoyance. Their primary instructor, a man named Thorne with a jaw like a block of granite and eyes that saw weakness as a personal affront, did nothing to stop it. In fact, he seemed to approve. He saw it as part of the forging process, the culling of the herd. The strong assert their dominance, the weak are swept aside. In his brutally simplistic worldview, the old janitor was just part of the scenery, an object lesson in irrelevance. "Look around you," he would bark at the exhausted candidates. "This place has no room for the weak, the slow, the invisible. You are either a weapon or you are a target. There is no in-between," and his eyes would sometimes flick toward Alara, a silent underscoring of his point. She was the target. She was the nothingness they were all striving to leave behind. Yet, Alara remained impervious. Her stoicism was not passive. It was an active, impenetrable defense. She cleaned the spills, moved the equipment, and navigated the gauntlet of their contempt with a dignity that was its own form of defiance. Her hands, though wrinkled and scarred, were steady and sure. Her back, though stooped by years, held a core of iron straightness. She was a rock in the middle of a rushing stream, and the water of their arrogance simply flowed around her, unable to erode the fundamental truth of what she was. They saw a janitor. They saw an old woman. They saw what their limited vision allowed them to see, and in their blindness, they missed the warrior standing right in front of them. Not everyone was blind. Cadet Reyes was cut from a different cloth than Miller. Where Miller was loud, Reyes was quiet. Where Miller was arrogant, Reyes was observant. He had been raised by his grandfather, a retired Navy captain, who had taught him that the most dangerous men are often the ones you never notice. Reyes began to watch Alara, not with contempt, but with a growing sense of curiosity. He saw the military precision in the way she organized her supply closet, every bottle and rag aligned with geometric perfection. He saw the way she walked, a balanced, centered gait that spoke of a deep, instinctual awareness of her body in space. She never seemed startled, never seemed rushed. She simply existed, a point of serene focus in the center of the daily chaos. One afternoon, as the California sun slanted through the high windows of the gymnasium, Reyes saw her stretching to wipe down a dusty ledge. The sleeve of her gray work shirt, worn thin from 1,000 washings, slid down her arm, exposing her forearm. And there it was. Reyes froze mid-stride, his water bottle slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. The sound was loud in the cavernous room, but he didn't notice. His entire focus was on the faded ink on her weathered skin. It was a trident, its prongs blunted by time, its details blurred into a soft, bluish gray. But it was wrapped in the coils of a sea serpent, its head resting near the trident's base. It was not the crisp, modern seal trident every man there was bleeding to possess. It was something else, something older, something from the history books, the ones stamped classified and kept in locked archives. A symbol he'd seen only once, in a grainy black and white photograph in his grandfather's private study. A jolt, electric and profound, shot through him. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet, invisible janitor. The archaic, legendary tattoo. The two images warred in his mind, a paradox that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He felt a sudden, chilling certainty that he was standing on the edge of a truth far deeper and more dangerous than any training evolution. The breaking point arrived with the fury of a sudden squall. It was Hell Week, and the candidates were being pushed past every conceivable limit. They were cold, wet, and sleep-deprived, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. During a particularly grueling log-lifting exercise, Miller's grip slipped. His corner of the massive, waterlogged telephone pole dipped, throwing the entire team off balance and earning them a thunderous tirade from Instructor Thorne. Humiliated and seething, Miller scanned the area, his eyes searching for a target, a receptacle for his rage. He found one. Alara was quietly refilling the large water coolers at the edge of the grinder, her movements as deliberate and unobtrusive as always. To Miller, in his state of raw fury, her very calmness was an insult. He stomped toward her, his face a mask of primal anger. "What are you even doing here?" he screamed, his voice cracking with exhaustion and rage. "Get out of here. This is a place for warriors. We're trying to work here, and you're just in the way. You're a distraction." Alara slowly straightened up, turning to face him. She held a plastic water jug in her hand, but her gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. Instructor Thorne saw his opportunity. He strode over, not to defuse the situation, but to pour gasoline on the fire. He placed a heavy hand on Miller's shoulder, a gesture of grim approval. "That's right, Miller," Thorne boomed, his voice carrying across the entire training ground. "Focus. Distractions are everywhere. Weakness is everywhere. You must learn to tune it out, to treat it as nothing." He gestured dismissively at Alara. "She is nothing, less than nothing. She is a ghost, an obstacle. Learn to see through her." The entire class, 75 exhausted men, were forced to stand and watch. It was a calculated act of public degradation, designed to strip away one person's humanity to teach a lesson to the others. Alara stood alone in the center of their collective gaze, silent and still, absorbing the full weight of their contempt. Reyes felt a hot surge of shame and anger. This was wrong. It wasn't about mental toughness. It was about cruelty. It was a violation of some fundamental code of honor that his grandfather had instilled in him since he was a boy. While Thorne continued his lecture, using the silent old woman as a prop for his brutal philosophy, Reyes saw his chance. He faded back from the formation, melting into the shadows of a supply shed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled out his phone, his fingers slick with sweat and sand. He had to make this call. He had to know. The image of that serpent-wrapped trident was burned into his mind. He dialed his grandfather. The old captain answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Reyes? Everything all right, son? You shouldn't be calling." Reyes spoke in a low, urgent whisper, the words tumbling out of him. He described Alara, her quiet dignity, the way she moved, the public shaming he had just witnessed. And then, he described the tattoo. "Grandpa, it was a trident, but it was wrapped in a snake. A sea serpent. I've only ever seen it in your study." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. The warmth in his grandfather's voice vanished, replaced by something cold and hard, a tone Reyes hadn't heard since he was a child who had made a grave mistake. "Describe the woman again," the captain commanded, his voice clipped and precise. Reyes did, adding every detail he could remember. Another pause, longer this time. When his grandfather spoke again, his voice was deadly serious. "Listen to me very carefully, Cadet. Do not engage. Do not say a word to anyone. Go back to your formation and act as if nothing happened. I am making a call. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. The line went dead." Reyes stood frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear. A cold dread, mingled with a strange sense of awe, washed over him. He had just lit a fuse, and he had no idea how big the explosion was going to be. An hour crawled by. The brutal training resumed, but the atmosphere on the grinder had changed. It was charged, heavy with an unspoken anticipation. Instructor Thorne was still in his element, barking orders, pushing the men to their breaking point. Miller, having vented his frustration, was swaggering with a renewed sense of dominance. Alara had long since finished her work in the area and disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the base, leaving behind only the faint, clean scent of ammonia and the lingering shame of the incident. Then came the sound. It started as a low, deep thrumming, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was not the familiar, choppy beat of the training Hueys or the high-pitched whine of a jet from the nearby Naval Air Station. This was different. It was a powerful, resonant hum that grew steadily in volume, demanding attention. Every head on the grinder turned, squinting against the bright sun. A sleek, black helicopter, its paint job absorbing the light, was descending from the sky. It was a Sikorsky VH-60N White Hawk, a machine reserved for the highest echelons of government and military command. It bypassed the designated helipad entirely. With breathtaking arrogance and precision, the pilot brought the aircraft down directly onto the hallowed sand of the grinder, the powerful rotor wash kicking up a blinding storm of dust and grit. Training came to an immediate, chaotic halt. Men shielded their eyes. Equipment was blown about, and Thorne screamed orders that were lost in the deafening roar of the turbines. The message was clear and absolute. Whatever was happening here was more important than their pain, their training, their entire world. The grinder, their sacred space of suffering, had been commandeered. The side door of the White Hawk slid open with a smooth, hydraulic hiss. Two men in starched service uniforms and gleaming jump boots stepped out first, their faces impassive, their eyes scanning the area with cold professionalism. They were Master Chief Petty Officers, their expressions honed by decades of service in the shadows. They took up positions on either side of the door. Then, a third figure emerged, stepping down onto the sand with an air of absolute authority. He was tall and lean, his dress white uniform a startling slash of brilliance against the drab landscape. Medals and ribbons covered the left side of his chest in a dense, colorful tapestry of valor. On his shoulder boards glittered 4 silver stars. It was Admiral Harrison Jackson, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command itself, the living god of their universe. The roar of the engines began to subside as the pilots spooled them down, but the silence that followed was even more deafening. Instructor Thorne, his face ashen, stumbled forward, snapping a clumsy salute. "Admiral, sir, this is an unexpected honor. We were not informed of your arrival." Admiral Jackson did not return the salute. He did not even look at Thorne. His gaze, sharp and penetrating as a shard of ice, swept over the assembled, dumbfounded candidates, over the training obstacles, over the entire scene. He seemed to be searching for something, his jaw set in a line of grim purpose. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it cut through the stunned silence like a razor. "Where is she?" Thorne blinked, utterly bewildered. "She, sir? I don't understand." The Admiral's eyes finally locked onto Thorne's, and the instructor visibly flinched from the force of his fury. "Do not play games with me, Commander." Jackson's voice was low, a controlled storm of rage. "I will ask you one more time. Where is Master Chief Petty Officer Alara Vance?" The name hung in the air, meaningless. "Vance. Master Chief." The cadets and instructors exchanged confused glances. It sounded like a name from a roster, but no one could place it. Thorne stammered, "Sir, there must be some mistake. There is no Master Chief Vance stationed here. One of the Admiral's aides, a young lieutenant with an iPad, stepped forward and pointed discreetly toward the sprawling complex of buildings. Intel places her in the mess hall, Admiral. She's on the civilian custodial staff. The words landed like a series of grenade blasts. Custodial staff. A janitor. The collective minds of everyone present struggled to reconcile the four-star Admiral, the combat helicopter on their grinder, and the notion of a janitor. Admiral Jackson gave Thorne one last look of pure, unadulterated contempt before striding off toward the mess hall, his two Master Chiefs falling into step behind him like twin shadows. The entire training class, along with their instructors, followed at a distance, drawn by a morbid curiosity they couldn't resist. They crowded the entrance of the mess hall, peering inside. There, in the middle of the cavernous room, was Alara. She was wiping down a table with a damp cloth, her back to the door, seemingly oblivious to the seismic event that was unfolding. The Admiral came to a halt precisely 3 feet behind her. He stood there for a full second, his posture ramrod straight. Then, in a movement that was shockingly crisp and deeply reverent, he raised his hand to his brow and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his long and decorated career. Master Chief Vance, his voice rang out, filled with a respect that bordered on awe. It is an honor to be in your presence again. Alara stopped wiping the table. Every person watching held their breath. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. Thorne looked as though he might collapse. The world had just been turned upside down. Alara slowly, deliberately, placed her cleaning rag on the polished surface of the table. She straightened her back, and in that simple movement, a lifetime of burdens seemed to fall away. The stooped, unassuming janitor vanished, and in her place stood someone else, someone with an aura of command that was ancient and absolute. She turned, her sea-gray eyes meeting the Admiral's. With a precision that was both breathtaking and terrifying, a muscle memory that transcended time, she returned his salute. It was perfect, more than perfect. It was a gesture of such ingrained authority that it made every other salute the cadets had ever witnessed look like a child's clumsy imitation. Admiral Jackson held his salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He then turned to face the stunned, silent crowd crammed in the doorway. His face was a mask of cold fury, and his voice, when he spoke, was the formal, righteous thunder of judgment. You stand on ground that was consecrated by warriors you are not worthy of even reading about. This woman, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl as he gestured toward Alara, whom you have treated like dirt, is a founding pillar of this entire command. Before there were SEALs, there were the underwater demolition teams, and before that, there were the ghosts of the coast. She is Master Chief Petty Officer Alara Vance. Code name, Nyx. He paused, letting the name sink in. She was one of the 12 original UDT Pathfinders. She swam into enemy harbors when you boys' grandfathers were still learning to walk. That tattoo on her arm is not a seal trident. It is the original sigil, the serpent trident, awarded only to those 12. It has not been issued in over 70 years. He took a step toward them, his voice rising with historical weight and righteous anger. She holds 3 Navy crosses for actions so classified they will never be public. 5 silver stars. A purple heart from a piece of shrapnel that is still lodged 2 inches from her spine. She served this nation in the darkest shadows for 30 years. When she retired, she could have had anything. A cushy government job, a pension, a quiet life. She asked for only one thing: to stay here, to be near the water, and to watch over the legacy she helped build. She scrubs your floors not because she has to, but as a silent vigil. And today, you spit on that vigil. You have proven yourselves unworthy of the air she breathes. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any physical weight. It was the silence of shattered arrogance, of dawning, horrified comprehension. Cadet Miller stood at the front of the crowd, his face the color of wet ash, his body trembling uncontrollably. Instructor Thorne looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn down around him. Every sneer, every condescending word, every act of petty cruelty now replayed in their minds, recast as a sacrilege of unimaginable proportions. The Admiral turned his back on them, his dismissal complete. He faced Alara once more, his expression softening into one of deep, personal apology. Master Chief, I am profoundly sorry for the dishonor you have been shown by these children. I will have Commander Thorne's credentials revoked and this entire class recycled or removed from the program. Alara finally spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the cavernous hall with the quiet authority of a mountain. No, Admiral, every eye snapped to her. She looked at the assembled cadets, her gaze sweeping over them, finally landing on the broken figure of Miller. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep and abiding weariness, the kind that comes from seeing generations of young men make the same mistakes. They are not children, she said, her voice soft but firm. They are clay. The program is the potter. Sometimes, the hands that shape the clay are flawed. She looked directly at Thorne, who flinched as if struck. The lesson they learned today, the shame they feel right now, that is a more powerful forge than any punishment you could devise. She then turned her gaze back to Miller, who was now openly weeping, his tough facade completely crumbled. Honor is not in the noise you make, son, she said, her voice gentle. It's in the silence you keep when your duty is done. She then bent down, picked up her rag, and turned back to the table as if to resume her work. Miller, completely undone, stumbled forward and collapsed to his knees before her. Master Chief, I'm so sorry. Alara didn't turn around. Her voice was a quiet command. Show me, she said softly. Don't tell me. Admiral Jackson watched the exchange, a flicker of profound understanding in his eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The lesson was delivered. His work was done. He turned and strode back toward his helicopter, his Master Chiefs falling in behind him. As the White Hawk lifted off, blasting the grinder one last time with its powerful rotor wash, the cadets were left in a world that had been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. They stood in the deafening silence, no longer looking at a janitor, but at a living monument, a quiet old woman who was the very soul of the trident they so desperately sought to earn. For Cadet Reyes, and for all the others who had witnessed the truth, the real training had just begun.